Olá, bem-vindos. Muito obrigada. Este é o primeiro episódio de uma série de conversações com algumas realidades editoriais. Peço desculpa pelo meu português, que eu sei não é... Ainda não é. Obrigada, mas todavia hoje vamos falar em inglês porque outras realidades editoriais enviadas são internacionais. Então, vamos mudar em inglês. Thank you so much all for coming. Welcome to Kunsthalle Lissabon, and we are going to present today the first episode of Written Printout, a series of conversation about self-publishing and self-care. Actually, you may wonder why self-care related to self-publishing is because we were struck by how a lot of realities, editorial publication and publishing houses were addressing the care of the self in their books, in their publication, in the new magazines, and some of them like trying to improving their, let's say, the relaxation, the spirituality, and some others, sorry, I'm the desire, and I'm talking about some of course, the guests like Phile magazine, Hamam Magazine, and Ignota books, who are also between our guests, among our guests. And then also there are also some realities as Pântano who are trying somehow to investigate the ways to improve our self-care without labels, without any restriction, and that's why we came here and I invited them to present, of course, their entire project, which is Pântano, but also the first book they made it, like Sexist Care and Other Viral Poems by Pedro Neves Marques, and also the other one that is going to be published soon, that I was super excited because they are going to present it or announce it today. So yeah, I mean, I'm super thrilled to hear because I don't know either. So here we are, and thank you again for coming. Just one thing before starting, I would like to thank, of course, all our sponsors, DGArtes and Coleção Maria, Armando Cabral, and especially Collezione Agovino from Naples, who decided to support the entire project for this year. Thank you.
Thanks, Alberto, for having us, and also for your interest in the project and excitement since the beginning, because you were very enthusiastic about it, since I remember, and for me that was very encouraging. Yeah, I don't know if we should talk a bit about how this came about, or can everyone hear me? Can you hear me, Colin? Can you?
A little, yeah.
Okay, I'll speak louder. I was just thanking Alberto for being so encouraging about the project since the beginning. She was very enthusiastic about it. And I don't know if we should say something about how this
Well, I love the talk show format.
Oh, Pedro, so...
Where's the notes?
I think it's a super nice program, first of all, to say like that you guys are starting this, and some of the other magazines and publishers are super good. Sorry. Huh? Oh yeah, sorry. So that's really incredible because there's a serious lack of like just this kind of moments as well, right? So that's really nice of you. It's a bit sad that we only have like one book, so it's kind of like embarrassing, but especially because it's my book. But we missed it by like just a little bit because today actually our second books just went to the printer. So in a couple of weeks, finally we'll have them here, and so I think what we want also to talk a bit about the program. We're kind of thinking moving forward, and and just talk a bit why the project came about, and yeah, and just read a little bit, I guess, right? From both, I guess.
From both.
Yeah, we can already read. Okay, so the first publication, and I think we can talk about it, why it happened, is my first collection of poems. I've always written more kind of like essays or short fiction, but poetry really became kind of very important to me the last few years. And I think talking about what's going to come up next, so the project is, because we found ourselves both in Portugal, I guess, it felt important to us that we wanted, and we want to work with people internationally, especially maybe younger people, or like, but also kind of translate into Portuguese more established poets that we find are relevant nowadays. And so the first, hopefully we'll be kind of alternating between both. And so we're publishing first translation of C.A. Conrad into Portuguese, or maybe actually, as far as we realize, maybe one of the first translations of C.A.'s work besides English. So we're really proud of that. And that's going to be the Book of Frank, which is quite an important book for C.A.
It's their first book, actually. Their first
their first kind of official, let's say.
Was published by Wave Books, and for those in the audience that don't know, C.A. is a US born and based poet, and they published already almost five books, along with a long array of chapbooks and small publications. And yeah, they've been quite a big poetry voice in recent years, and we found that publishing their poems was an exercise that we potentially would find interesting to do, and to get closer to their work in this way, and also being able to bring their work to Portuguese language readers. So that's pretty much what we did. Because for Pântano, the original idea, so do you want to say why?
I wanted to announce, I guess, also a third publication we're already starting to work with, and it's in the audience, so maybe it's already right.
Oh, coitadinha. Yeah, we're going to publish so our third publication. So I'm going to first, to give some context, when we launched Pântano, the idea was to always go between a publication in English, an original publication in English, and one translation into Portuguese, and go between both. So it's like two parallel collections, one of originals in English and one of translations into Portuguese. So we have Pedro's book, which is originally in English. Now we're having a translation of C.A. And following up, we're going to translate another original in English, also by a Portuguese artist, who is Odette, who's in the audience, and is also my beloved friend. And following that, it will again potentially be, hopefully, another translation either by us or someone else who find
more appropriate
to do it.
I guess we can talk a little bit about how it came about, also, and also some of these first choices as well. I'm thinking, for me, I guess, I don't know. As many of you know, I lived in New York for many years, and one of the things that I miss the most nowadays, even about New York, is actually the poetry community, and it gave me a lot throughout those years. And I think what I found really special there and really attracted me was the feeling of a shared space, through poetry, and going every week, a couple of times a week, hearing people read poetry and discuss, but in a very different way to sometimes. And this is not to say kind of like to kind of like trash art spaces, at all. No, it's just the kind of the honesty of sharing poetry and the care again that you were mentioning that I found for myself in those spaces really kind of offered me a lot. So I think for me, when we started talking about poetry and when we met and we found that we were both very, very kind of taken with poetry, I think that aspect was something we talked about, and I feel like some of that hopefully is in this first book of mine, for example, and definitely it's in C.A. Conrad's poetry, and I guess that also speaks to how I saw C.A. C.A., like Alice was saying, is really seminal. I think they're an author that's really become very important in the New York scene, poetry scene.
And European scene.
And European, and maybe you can talk a bit more about that, because I met C.A. Reading poems and kind of like drawing tarot cards. They're really into all of those kind of things. But you met them in a different way.
Yeah, I studied under C.A., so C.A. was one of my tutors at Sandberg. And I didn't know who they were at the time, and everybody around me was like, oh my god, you're studying with C.A., what the hell, like, oh my god, you're so lucky. And I didn't know who they were. I was quite young and I didn't know much about poetry, in the New York scene. And everybody was so excited, and I was like, okay, what is this about? And then I realized when we spent a week doing a workshop in which they basically told me that what I should do in the next couple of days would be to ride my bike and speak to a recording while riding my bike, just like speak out, and then find myself a time and space to listen back to what I had said. I was like, oh my god, you've made the beginning of my life in a new city, in a new country, so special. And I did that, and the memory of that process and of that ritual still marks pretty much that phase of my life. And soon I realized how big they were as well in the European scene, especially Amsterdam. They went back there every year. They read in a lot of places. In Portuguese, which is also, I think, maybe to speak about what you were saying, in New York, it's incomparable, but it's also a place for poetry where many poets come and go. And so that started entering my life, and C.A.'s poetry, in a way, and I think I can say that, was an entryway into poetry in this phase of my life specifically. So it's very special to have had the opportunity to take the time with their words and translate them into the language that I know better.
Yeah, that's actually wonderful that you are doing in Portuguese. I mean, you are also like giving an important part of your experience, their experience, but also trying to, translate in a language that before I've never seen, their project. So it's amazing, your initiative. But also about what you were saying, if I can quote you, can I?
Oh God, no.
I mean, it's like, it's not about like quoting, but when you said that you are actually feeling more yourself, and somehow that caring is important also through poetry, etc. I think it was very impressive to me reading the author's note when I ended the book, because you wrote this, I'm going to quote them. If I write about me, it's only because everything else I write is not about me. I found it honest. And I think this is wonderful. Just because most of the time what we listen, especially when we are in the art world or in general, when we are like starting to write in the art world, let's say, they always tell you not to be too diaristic, to write too personally about what you like and what you Care talk about. And that's actually not something nice to say, not even something helpful for you. Because of course it can sound heuristic in a way, what you want to say, but doesn't mean that it's stupid for that reason. And so the fact that you wrote at the end of the book that you thought that was honest, I think it's really a good, starting point.
Yeah. I don't know. I think in terms of like the publisher, right? I think because one thing is the book and myself as a writer, but the publisher, I think maybe it's more intuitive. The feeling of, I think it was very intuitive. Like we were both saying that CA became the second person we're working with, and then Odette the third person we're working with, and just kind of being very, for example, CA of course is a major author in a way, but it's just kind of, they're an author that's also very kind of, very open, and very open about their traumas and where their poetry comes from. CA, for example, has very specific biography in terms not only of their queerness, but also of personal issues with a past lover, and that really goes into their poetry. So I think that there's not like very programmatic approach. Also some of the ideas that we're discussing about like future people who want to translate or work with, it's not very programmatic, it's very kind of intuitive, and I think especially the translations that they're helpful, that for the context here in Portugal, I think it's very different again, like the people we might want to work with in English is very different to the people we want to translate, because of course we did our research in terms of what was being written and translated into poetry here in Portugal, and I guess, I know you can correct me, but it felt to me, for example, very much kind of, there was a serious lack of not only contemporary authors, but kind of really important ones, for the poetry scene in many places. So in an humble way, I mean, it would be nice that we could kind of introduce a bit more of those authors, and even like the C.A. Conrad's book that's going to come out now in a couple of weeks. The how do you say, the endnotes are by Aileen Miles, for example, who's also an author that's like one of the biggest kind of poets alive today, maybe in a way, and they've also never been translated, so it's also nice. It's just an endnote, but it's nice that it's there. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to read?
Yeah, that would be great.
Or should I read? Or now that?
Do you mind if I just ask you a question before we start reading?
Yeah, I think it would be nice. I think it would be nice to talk before we read.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you were mentioning your experience of New York and the poetry readings in New York as being this, really kind of interesting space, almost like a safe space, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if there's a will in Pântano to achieve something like that as well, of going just beyond publishing and start creating some sort of, groups or gatherings where people can actually read and... No.
No.
Okay.
I don't think so at the moment, but I would be very open to that if someone would like to, or any context would like to start a conversation or any sort of exchange from one of our books. That would be very special, but not as a. It's not as a. No, we're not thinking about it.
No, because it sounded very enticing the way you said it. Like,
but hopefully through the publications, we will hopefully build that space. But it's already quite like an amount of work and money. because we could be printing kind of very slim things, and no, we decided to print 120-page books, and that's a stupid idea, financially. But yeah, but it's a shame because the pandemic happened. So with this book, for example, we were planning some presentations and they never happened. And with CA now, I think it will be easier. And we thought that it will also be easier because hopefully things will get better in time. But yeah.
Are you planning like book launches with the authors?
Yeah, I mean, actually with Pedro, some bookshops wanted to do that throughout last year, and we couldn't do that. Also, I think I must mention, if by any chance some of them watch this live stream ever, that some of them have been really accommodating and supporting of us. So since Sensory in Amsterdam, Hopscotch in Berlin, and others in UK as well. So in Glasgow, Good Press. And I'm very thankful for that. And all of them wanted to, you know, like bring you there, bring us there, and we couldn't because of the pandemic. But yeah, I mean, huge shout out, because I feel like that made me feel like the effort. Also, it's pretty crazy. I never thought of myself as being a publisher, and all of a sudden, we're kind of sending emails, you know, having to manage that kind of commercially in a way. So it's very nice to see that that we're so far the book has had quite a nice reception.
That was really nice because again we didn't know, and I guess like working more in the arts but then seeing my book kind of having a nice reception and people asking for it is super nice, and it builds up for the next authors. So because hopefully with those bookshops we start kind of having like the same dialogue, and I never also had like a publishing project before, so it's the first time.
But I think also that it's interesting that in this kind of moment that of course was problematic, was sad for all of us and was difficult, but without, you know, building a physical space where sharing poetry, but making the book and sending the book through, and you create this safe space, like very in an intimate way. So I think it definitely worked. I mean, nowadays especially that you could have it and read it by yourself while you didn't know, you know, what was going on, and having this moment just for you. It was a good moment actually. It was not regret, I guess.
No, has been really fun so far. I'd say.
Cool.
Can I keep going?
Of course.
No, I'm sorry. I just thinking of questions that I would like to ask, because even though we know each other, I don't think we've ever had the opportunity to talk about Pântano or your relation to poetry as publishers. And it's interesting that, you know, like in the late 2000s there were tons of turns, you know, the conversational turn, the educational turn, whatnot. Do you think that we're going through a poetry turn in visual arts, or?
I want to ask you why you asked that question.
Because you're both visual artists and you're both committed to poetry right now. And I think that is really interesting. And I just wanted to know. And this is just like, you know.
I think that's
clickbait
a
sentence.
quite interesting question, actually. I don't know if I'm. I think I'm too involved to be able to answer. But but just in a surface level kind of way, I don't know. Maybe other people in the audience who are also artists can also say something about this.
I would say that I have
and the third line.
Yeah,
how do you feel about?
I've seen it.
I mean, it's around.
No,
it's around.
It's around
We have a
It's
hand
around.
over there.
I actually have a suggestion. There's a pretty famous trend watcher, Emily Segal. She works for Nemesis. She's written lots of things, and she's actually taken seriously as a trend watcher. And she just published, self-published her first novel, and her second one is for sale with NFTs, never mind. But one of our forecasts for the 2020s was that poetry is becoming the new indie rock. So it was indie rock was in the 2000s. Sorry, that's great. I quite like that.
Okay.
Well, thanks, Antonio.
Sorry, we do not advocate for that description.
No. Thanks for destroying the project.
So much.
Everything but indie.
No, but I think, okay, now getting a bit serious. If I can.
It's here just objective.
No, of course I know what you're mentioning. I feel, I don't know, obviously I can only speak for myself, but the last few years have been super shitty in general, politically and personally, and now the pandemic and just piles up. And not only shitty, but kind of like, I guess they put a lot of us at a loss in terms of direction, and I think a lot of goals and aims that not only people but projects had, and maybe at least I feel that poetry in a way has filled up maybe a little bit that space of reorientation or just being kind of again like, and not all poets are honest, obviously, at all, but just kind of being more straightforward in a way, and just more fragile. At least that's my point of view, because that's my take on certain types of poetry that I'm interested in, kind of the fragility of it, and the exposure, and like you're saying, kind of breaking down some walls, and so that will be my perception sociologically of what you're asking, because there's been like artist poets for a long time. Come on, it's not new, and let's not make it new because the terms are not a good idea in general. Yeah, that will be my answer. Yeah.
We have a question, by the way.
I'm curious about how you think about the format. Like, we can't read. Sorry, I'll try and
Project.
I was just curious about what you think about the format, because obviously poetry kind of allows for this intimate space with the text that is a one-on-one, like a relationship that is personal and individual. But then you were also talking about the importance of these communal spaces of sharing text, and I find poetry extremely powerful in its voicing as well, like when it goes through the body. And so I was curious how you see those things in relation, or like contrast maybe. Yeah. I'm not sure if it's a contrast, but I'm just kind of curious about that. Thank
you. To me, they're intertwined. I think the way I think also my interest in poetry, maybe our interest in poetry, comes as well from maybe from the performance, from the way the text is performed, right, within poetry and within the timings and the rhythms that poetry allows for a space for text to arise, to make itself known, and to deliver itself. So I think to answer to your question, yes, they're related, and to have them in paper, of course, I don't know. Now I can also talk a bit about the formality of this, right? Because it's so extremely formal, and it's beautifully designed by Alex Walker. He's a designer based in the Netherlands. But it's just so exquisitely formal, and that is something that I had seen recently, or up until recently, that artists' poetry books were also often framed and designed as artist poetry books. And what we wanted to know, and you're an artist as well, was to really make these books as formally traditional poetry books as possible. To maybe, in a way, now that you asked, maybe I'm kind of processing it too. In a way, to be able to have in paper only what can be translated within voice, with the voice and with the performance, maybe. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. I just came to it.
Yeah, but no distractions. Yeah, you know.
Yeah,
right?
like
So
no.
I think just add something.
Yeah.
Poetry has been around for longer than books.
Yes.
Sorry.
So
yes.
one tradition really comes from the other.
Orality,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Book is really more recent phenomenon than
Than
poetry.
poetry. That's true. I just was.
Huh?
I
It's
just
a
wanted
500-year-old technology, actually, right?
Yeah. Actually, what you mentioned is a good idea. So we didn't mention like formally about the publisher in the sense that like Alex Walker, our designer, came kind of with the layout, and this is the kind of the standard design for all the books going forward. The translations will have some slight differences, but very slight, and that also felt kind of a good idea for us, both practically and also like that it's an image that the publisher has. You know, it's always had just like this. And
sorry that we'll have to stick with our design.
No, about the embodiment also, I think it goes to what you're asking. Yeah, I think to me that was, in this case, like in my poetry, I think the body is really important, and the fragility of the body is really important. So yeah, I think maybe reading would be more obvious. Should I move on to reading, and then we read from here? I didn't prepare. I didn't choose. So anyway, just maybe presenting the first book for those who don't know it. Because I know some of you already have it. But
the ones who don't, I mean, you can buy it here. But
yeah,
And get it signed.
And for those who already
yes.
have it, thank you so much, by the way.
yeah. So the first book, I mean, I have this problem that this is happening with the new kind of manuscript I'm working on, that I always collapse 2 books in one. So Sexist Care and Other Viral Poems can be read as 2 books in a way, in the sense that the viral poems, I first showed them as an artwork actually, because I've been working with poetry more recently as art pieces as well. And so that's very specific. I wrote them over a summer in São Paulo, and they were very programmatic. I knew what I wanted to do with those poems. As many of you know, I go very often to Brazil. I have a very deep relation with Brazil, and that summer arriving there, it was the summer right before Bolsonaro was elected, actually, and I was working on a film, and I was working with quite an extensive group of mostly queer people. And many of our conversations, and also my concerns already, like in advance of that trip to São Paulo, were around the violence that was happening, not only in Brazil, but very much in Brazil, and many friends of mine kind of talking with me about it already from afar. And so the viral poems really speak about the virality in that sense of both the virality of violence and the way it just felt like it was just kind of like an epidemic, and so there's many images of epidemics in those poems, but in the streets and kind of like just walking in São Paulo and really feeling the difference comparing to like 10 years ago when São Paulo was really like, and Rio even more, like really free, and now it's super complicated. And then it has like a bunch of stuff about mosquitoes, because I was really deep into mosquitoes because of the Zika epidemic back then in Brazil some years ago. So there's kind of a crossover between kind of science and the way kind of science trying to control the Zika epidemic and mosquitoes and that kind of species, and kind of like human violence against kind of especially queer communities or queer people. And then, so that was very programmatic. And then the Sexist Care was that came up in 2 or 3 poems, Sexist Care, as a verse. And those are just very diaristic, and that's what I mostly write nowadays, just kind of writing often and just kind of coming from a very kind of personal space naturally. So there's no kind of like, it was just a collection, just kind of gathering some that made sense in terms of like the feelings I wanted to kind of, to connect to the other one, to the final poems. So. I didn't choose them. This is too long, maybe.
Something spicy.
And something long, right? I'm writing shorter and shorter nowadays. Okay, maybe this one. It's also has something about art at some point, so why not?
This is from the second
This is
set
from the Sexist Care set.
Okay.
And this is very kind of like, this is a free verse and very kind of plain, which I appreciate. And it's called Saturation, and it's in 4 parts. 1, vow. I sit here listening to people, and I have nothing else to say. I don't want to hear these people anymore, nor do I want to talk. The damage is done. I am saturated. I will take a vow of silence like Bob Kaufman. From now on, people won't hear a word from me, my crackling voice. People say I'm refined, have something to say about everything and anything. They expect criticism, reviews, and finger-pointing, too harsh, too true. I was given a role, and so I acted that role. I owned it. Invitations, front row seats, eager eyes for the uttering lips. But I am empty, and I have no opinions left to share, no comments, no criticism. 2, silence. You arrived, and it was late. And you as much expected debate from me, intervention and polemics. But I had followed just then Kaufman's lead. I stayed quiet. I disappoint you, I'm sure. I told you when we first met how I had changed. You did not believe me, but afterwards, confronted by my newly found lack of personality, you found me strange. So you took the word of those around me when they came, bringing along my reputation. They left it away as well. I could not express my vow because I was silent, and expressing myself would have been contrary to the vow. 3, music. It was not pain, it was boredom, and simple things like pointless highways and airports and ridiculous chatter, noise. You texted me a beautiful image, alone at night listening to Salome and Richard Strauss in your car in the open fields. But then it was a tome we wrote together. I did not know if touching your neck would offend you, or if you would interpret it as a gentle care, which it was. I recalled your hands pushing my legs in opposite directions. Afterwards, my taste on your facial hair. My silence was complete. You may have thought me a child, stubborn, out of place, with nothing to say, nothing to add. If you thought it, it was true. 4, art. Perhaps it was precarity and the bad payments, or our payments always arrived late. Perhaps it was the intellectual superiority, or how at odds generosity was with driven careers, the same voices, crisp and overreaching, while the majority remains silent. Maybe it was simply a matter of education, the automated behavior of breaking holes into ever smaller parts without ever bothering to glue them all together again. Who talks after movies anyway? It was class and it was race, the divisions tokenized but never resolved. Group therapy did not help. Community building was a farce, necessary but dishonest. The therapy and the community never coalesced. Perhaps it was the lack of time, arguments exposed at the gate, airplane tickets paid for by someone else. But I am an individual with a heart, and despite these white, dehydrated walls we choose to walk in, it is normal that it should be. Why were we so afraid of the word love? So that was kind of a long one. Maybe. So this is a very short one. And this is for someone very special to me, which I won't mention, but because I kind of spotlight her. Bacterian love. Her fingernail readies to fall from her annular finger. As it will not regrow, her flesh is for now vulnerable. Soon though it will thicken, brimming with memories of a bad year. Bacteria and love, for oysters and summer showers. Bacterian love. And just one more, I guess.
If you feel it.
Now I'm on a roll.
Bye, go. I don't know if you want to read also one from the other set or...
I never found the others too oral, honestly. So I'm just...
Let's go with the second one.
No, yeah, I never wrote the first ones as like thinking them out loud. So
Okay.
they're very schematic.
That's actually also a good reply to the question before, because I think there can work, poetry sometimes depends also on the listener. I mean, if you feel like sharing loudly, or if you prefer to writing privately, and also the listener, if you feel comfortable in hearing something scream out loud, or if he prefers to read for himself. So that's kind of two-dimensional way of intent or address poetry. I think there are, of course, they coexist, but depends on the individual. So there is no universal reply. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, it's special how they can be really oral, but also.
I think I'll choose I think this is a funny one because it's hard to choose some of them. Some of them is just sometimes a bit strong to read them out loud, but this feels like maybe it's a funny one, not very obvious, hopefully, and it has a funny structure. So it's two sections. It's called Temp Bios. I actually never read this one out loud, so or like for the computer basically last year. 1, Afghanistan. Was one of those guys, if I ran into him on the street and he'd simply say, "Hey you, meet me tonight at 6. I'm going to the mountains of Afghanistan and I think it might be nice to have you along. Abandoning family, friends and all worldly possessions, I'd have been there at 6 without a second thought." Delaney. See you later. See you later. See you later. Don't forget watering a flower. 1 passion fruit tree, 1 carnation, 2 Azorian ferns. Watering a flower. Perhaps sometime soon we'll see each other again from across the street, and we'll talk to each other, careful not to hurt each other. Years in between, exchanges are valid and last for a long time. 2, gap penis. There remains an ultimate gap, as between 2 people, that not even a penis can bridge, a point at which we lose sight of the erection crossing the horizon in the mind. Wall drop. Exchanges are valid and last for a long time. A decade is a long time. Was it enough? I wish I could come back as a flower. We have the distance of a bed between us. still, even now, I stay behind and we fuck as promised. The bond is strong, unprotected. When you fuck me with your long pink prick, I hollow and realize the morning is mine. I am the unnecessary. That's.
Thank you.
Do you want to read some here?
If you feel like, yeah.
I mean, it's up to you. I don't know if this was.
I think it would be nice.
Okay.
It was only 3 poems.
Sure. So, I don't know if many of you know, but CA is a very arresting reader. The way they read their poems is really unrepeatable, and for that matter, I don't think I will read our translations, but they in any way will do justice to how CA would read them. So just so that you know, I do this in all humbleness.
Yeah, CA really kind of screams the poems in a way.
Yeah. Sorry, I lost them.
If anyone has any question in mind, just fill this gap would be great.
No, here it is.
No, she found it.
Okay, so the book is called, the book is called The Book of Frank, in Portuguese, O Livro de Frank. And it's also divided in 3 parts. So part 1, part 2, and part 3, and it follows a character, I'd say, called Frank throughout their life. And I'm going to read maybe 1 per part or 2. Frank detestava os 9 abortos, preservados em jarros de formol. A mãe arrotava cada um deles, colheradas de ervilhas contra os vidros. Embalava-os todos de uma vez, não havia espaço para Frank. És demasiado grande para os jarros, meu filho. Tens toda a tua vida para me trair. That was one. And another one. Mais um. Leite cai do céu. O campo é um lugar confortável e bolsa. Ninguém gosta de guarda-chuvas. Crocodilos ressonam na superfície branca do lago. Frank faz a cesta na relva, sorrindo. Sarjetas transbordam e azedam com o sol de amanhã. Agora vou ler da parte 2.
The poem, I think nowadays, or the last few years, CA has been writing mostly kind of this long, sinuous, kind of like very visually very beautiful kind of poems on the page, and they establish this what they call the somatic rituals or poetry, where like kind of like, sorry, just to explain maybe that are usually related to some exercise that they tell you to do, like ride your bicycle around Amsterdam while you speak or whatever, and then you write something. We opted not to translate for now any of those, and starting with the Book of Frank, because it was so important in CA's career. And the Book of Frank, CA hadn't started to write in those in that style. So all in the Book of Frank, each poem is quite small, and it's 1 per page, just so kind of to give you formally.
Okay. As Heinlein Miles says, almost like haikus, but in a like kind of, Heinlein says it in a
but
kind
even, yeah.
De uma maneira jocosa, kind of.
But I think CA also, yeah, in this book especially, like what you're saying about haikus, there's this kind of, it's very a lot of the imaginary is very kind of cartoonish, very like kept genres, and also like the haiku even being also something that's like, oh, like Aileen writes in the end notes, like, oh, let's do a haiku workshop, you know, kind of really cringe, but like reappropriating the haiku, but not obviously in the traditional kind of Japanese standards form. Yeah.
Maybe I'll write another one from the first part, because I really like this one, and I think it speaks a lot to that kind of, to that almost, to that cartoonish grime, or cartoonish gothic.
It's very gothic.
Yeah, kind of presence. Ai o peso dos substantivos que nem os verbos lhe valem. Sorry, I'm going to repeat this. Ai o peso dos substantivos que nem os verbos lhes valem, disse Frank. Tipo o quê? Perguntou a irmã. Cadáver, disse ele. Atirar os cadáveres. Vamos brincar ao atirar os cadáveres, berrou ela. Ai, fizeste o cadáver mexer-se, disse ele. Quando é que aprendes, Frank? Não há substantivo algum que um verbo não cure. This is one that I think pretty much resumes that. So maybe one from the second part, because the book kind of grows with this character, Frank, and the book grows with this character. So in the first poems, Frank is kind of portrayed as a child and as an adult, and later as almost like a mature person.
And there's this kind of, I think also something that attracted us not only to CA and to the book of Frank in particular is also this kind of, the way queerness is expressed in the text is very kind of ambiguous and very kind of like grime, like you're saying, I think is a good word. It's very kind of dirty, it's very kind of, sarcastic, and using sarcasm as kind of a self-reflection as well. And the way the gender and the desires of Frank evolve throughout the book, so it becomes very narrative, really is kind of like, kind of always like unfolding all of these contradictions in the character, the people Frank relates to, the way Frank has sex or discovers what sex is, and all of that is really kind of very, very slimy, very grimy, and it just feels very, it's not kind of a queer, celebration in a way.
Sorry, I'm just choosing. I don't know if you have.
No, I guess it's interesting that you choose the first book for introducing also to Portuguese speakers, and you choose their first book in which they were also going through, the process.
Yeah.
It was a good way to.
It's very. There's a big confusion as well between Frank and CA. Of course, there's quite a heavy autofictional element to the book, and as a reader of CA, it feels to me like it's something that they had to write before the semantic poetry happened, So as an introduction to a Portuguese audience, it feels maybe counterintuitive because it's not like maybe what people are chasing nowadays, people who know CA. But if we eventually end up publishing more, translating more by CA, there's going to be the Book of Frank, and that's a nice starting platform.
Here we go. Do menu de autores mortos, Frank pede o peito da Emily Dickinson, com dumplings e a coxa braseada da Anaïni. A sua mulher pede o anelar do Lev Tolstoy, com caviar e os genitais caramelizados do Jack Kerouac. A ereção do Kerouac chega a fervilhar no molho. Diz ela, mordiscando a ponta. Frank fixa e dá uma garfada no peito. No belo... e dá uma sorry, it finished here. Frank fixa e dá uma garfada no peito. So I just wanted to continue anyway. Sorry.
Thank you.
Do you want another one, or is this it?
No, one more.
One more.
Queres ler?
I still want us to buy the book, so please.
Yes, yeah. And this one is gonna be published.
So
more or less.
Well, it went on print today, so hopefully in 2 weeks we'll have it.
Okay.
And then they'll come to Lisbon, and then we'll do the distribution.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where do you usually distribute your books?
Here we actually only have it in ZDV.
Yeah, because we were waiting actually to have CAs in Portuguese, and then to be easier to kind of go around the usual kind of suspects like English papel, snob, and stuff like that. This one, this one is like all over. Luckily, it's all over Europe, so it's been quite easy. We've been trying in the US as well, and yeah, there's a couple of contacts in Hong Kong and stuff, but it's still not. It's also like, it's been better than we expected with the pandemic, because we were really like, oof, it's gonna be hard, but then actually it was okay. But we didn't, for example, only now we're actually starting to have it in art, like museum bookshops, for example, because they were all closed in the UK and Germany and stuff, so it's been mostly bookshops. Todas as noites, Frank dissolve-se nos lençóis. Não um homem, mas uma mancha. A mulher esfrega-o de volta à vida com a sua vagina pela manhã. Ele acorda engasgando-se com a luz, mais mineral que homem. Certa noite o cão dissolveu-se com Frank. A mulher esfregou-o de volta na manhã seguinte, entusiasmada por encontrar Frank grávido, finalmente. Frank passa molho de lençóis ao cowboy. Tenho o semen por dizer quando pensava em ti. O cowboy cheira-os e sorri. Obrigado, Frank. Vou guardá-los junto com os outros.
All the book. All the books.
Sorry, we're a bit
No,
excited.
the book is quite long.
They're not gonna
The
sell.
book is like 160 pages. Com as suas antenas, várias baratas mexericam sobre migalhas. Frank agita os indicadores sobre a cabeça e mete-se na conversa. Nunca pensou aprender nada. Nunca pensou apaixonar-se. Mas desde então, ele ocupa-se a cozinhar tachos cheios de lixo e a tricotar camisolinhas para o ninho. Ocupa na cama à noite. Ele lê a metamorfose do Kafka para se entreter. Quando finalmente adormecem, o quarto bate ao ritmo de 1000 pequenos corações sincronizados. Quando morrer, diz Frank, poderá ser banal, como usar inseticida, mas terei encontrado a minha tribo. Este é o meu
Last one.
Okay, so the last one. And this is a challenge to translate. As ervilhas respiram fundo quando as latas são abertas, disse Frank. A libertação das ervilhas é a tua coragem e abre-latas escondido numa ala de supermercado. This is my favorite book.
Thank you. Thank you too, guys, really.
Yes.
So for reading this part of the books. If you have any question or there is one.
If you could talk a little bit about the challenges of the translation.
Yeah.
Because also bearing in mind not only the interpretation but the form. If you sometimes you would maybe give up and choose to have the original. What gets lost in translation?
Yeah, a lot.
So one thing I would say, just for starters, is that we chose this book particularly because it wouldn't pose much of a challenge, formally, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a pretty simple book, and it's it's short format, the poems are short format, it's very oral, as we were saying. So we kind of chose it on purpose. As you were saying, we didn't go with the semantics,
poetry.
because those pose a much,
in terms of breaks, for
yeah,
example,
a
the
much
verse
bigger
breaks
challenge.
are quite challenging.
So here we could have a bit more freedom, I guess. I don't know if that applies, but
Yeah. No, and it's, I mean, translating poetry is creation, so so it's just a challenge to, and we kind of, I guess translating CA, for example, for us also it was interesting to see how we both kind of sometimes have different approaches, and sometimes we'll be like, no, let's just be more informal, let's just, you know, because translation is not, and like you're saying, you can't, even the metrics, you can't kind of respect it fully, and all of those things, but then you were like, no, but this has to be like this, and okay.
even the visual, the stain, right?
Yeah, even this, exactly, visually, like you're saying, even those breaks.
Like, I was obsessed with keeping the number of verses.
Yeah.
That was an obsession of mine.
Yeah, but not always, it doesn't always work.
It worked most of the
It
time.
worked most of the time. No.
You just have to try harder.
Yeah, and also prepositions. I was quite obsessed with. It's funny how I'm coming out as the kind of the I don't know,
the bad cop.
The bad cop of this, yeah. But like I was obsessed as well with prepositions, you know, and CA places a preposition at the end of a verse. I wanted to keep it that way.
You know, kind of swap verses.
But yeah, apart from that, it was just really fun to come up with words, because CA writes in a way, she uses terms that, or they use terms that are very colloquial.
Yeah, but at the same time, very kind of like specific to American English and to specific puns. So that was one of the big challenges with CA, was how do you translate that using Portuguese kind of expressions, but then kind of that sociologically kind of fits as well. And some of the poems we surprised ourselves also, like in terms of like, nice, we found like something that works, and yeah. But I think that's also the beauty of it. Like, I write poetry, Elise writes poetry, so I think that also, that's a nice starting point to translate poetry, first of all. Not that it's strictly necessary, but you understand a bit the sensibility of like line breaks and like, or the respect that you need, or you shouldn't, or when you need to respect the author, or when we can kind of play with it.
Or footnotes maybe. Or
yeah, we tried to avoid it a bit. We didn't go for footnotes because we didn't feel. I think the footnotes are like the ones that were originally in the text.
Okay.
No, we have two.
Oh, we have two that are very specific.
Yeah.
But it's more for characters than like the poems. For characters that CA mentions, who are they like? Yeah.
That it's kind of known and unavoidable that you lose a lot in the translation, or it breaks. Even the title in Portuguese doesn't have the double entendre of being the book of. No, Frank, of being frank.
Yeah.
I always read it as like the book of Frank has already that stamp of honesty, of frankness.
No, and also
in Portuguese, like Frank doesn't mean anything, just a name.
Yeah.
No, but also the book of Frank in relation to the book of Joe, the book of Job, so it's coming from that kind of Christian genealogy, but we don't really say it like that here. We say Evangel, you know,
This is with Job.
Sorry?
We say the
We say livro? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking Saramago. Yeah.
But also one thing that will be maybe interesting to say is what you mentioned early on about like translating, like moving forward. I think we are both very interested in translating in the future other authors, but I think we don't expect to always be the translators for all the Pântano books moving forward. So I think
also because some things are not ours to translate.
Yeah, I think for example, what happened recently with Amanda Gorman, you know, the black poet that was reading at the inauguration of Biden, we understand, you know, for some of you, I don't know if everyone, I guess most of you saw the polemics about, because it was actually a non-binary person in the Netherlands that was translating white, and there was all this discussion, why, not that it couldn't necessarily be a white person, but why not a black woman? Come on, there's a ton of people. So I think much, way before that polemic broke, I mean, to us it was very intuitive. Yes, there's some books that why not? Like, we don't need to translate always, and we will be super happy to work with other people in specific. And we were already thinking about that, inviting specific people to translate specific authors, but that's still kind of in the process. So yeah, because again, like, it's not only that you're a good translator, but also that the way, I think to us is that you connect to the text in a certain way.
I mean, brings everything to a different dimension and also address another thing that is sometimes problematic, not only in poetry, but movie, noveling, and a lot of stuff. So I think taking, like, making a decision about it is very important for me. So,
the nuances of, even in the book of Frank, so many nuances about like queerness or gender. Of course, anyone that's like sensitive enough and a good translator can work with it. I think that's my comment at least. But
can consult others.
Yeah, and of course can and should consult others. But the nuances are very, oh, okay, yeah, of course this is a pun on this term, you know, inside the joke, or
even the performative aspect of it, right?
Exactly.
The alliteração, right?
Yeah. I mean, we can talk informally. We can talk informally.
I see. We can just
Open
open a beer and mandarins.
So we got.
Thank you so much.
Quem corta verde com o puxa do cor laranja?
Gosta.
Caia disco ball.